If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, or what are your creepiest, spookiest, most inexplicable, supernatural/horrifying experiences? I get night terrors sometimes or sleep paralysis, usually before I get up or right after I fall asleep, but I haven't got into that deep sleep yet. So it still feels like I'm mildly aware of my surroundings. It doesn't last long, but it's that in-between feeling. Sometimes when people would talk to me when I'm in that half-sleep phase, and I respond, I'll always respond with plural pronouns. We're almost up, or we're still in bed, that sort of thing. When people then ask me why I'm using those pronouns, I'll say something like we're all together, or my friends are here. It was definitely weird at summer camp when I was a kid, or in the college dorms, but it's one of those things that's weird, but becomes pretty normal and easy to forget. Early on in college, while I was probably taking too many classes, I had started regularly taking these 20-minute naps in between studying. I'm not sure if I ever actually slept, but it was nice to have a few minutes to not study. When I did this though, I would end up in that quasi-sleep state. And I'd start to see people, or figures maybe, right at the edge of my peripheral. They'd look like people I knew. But their faces were always a little bit blurry or very severe looking, like they had been awake for a few days straight. The creepy thing though is they'd always start in my peripheral and then began to loom closer. Now, I knew about sleep paralysis at the time, so I figured it was creepy, but just something weird my brain was doing. And I didn't think much of it. Well, at least until the next time I was home. I told my dad about my weird half-dreams. He got very quiet and told me he got them too. Almost every night, if he didn't go right to sleep. It's been a few years now since college. I noticed that it doesn't happen as much if I'm sharing a bed. I mostly try to ignore it, but I definitely drink a bit more coffee and avoid naps. It was Christmas Day and I was 9 when we drove to my grandparents' house. My grandparents lived in a community which wasn't gated, but still required you to drive through the entrance of the community and then turn right, drive down 2 blocks of houses, and then turn left to get to their house. We had just turned right when we drove past a house that still had their Halloween decorations up. I pointed this out to my mom and she told me not to look at that house anymore and to look straight ahead until we arrived at my grandparents' house. Later on I realized that the Halloween decoration of a life-sized man in a suit hanging by a rope from the tree in the front yard was no decoration. This occurred during the Soccer Cup 2006 in Germany. A girl named Frauke Liebs was watching a match with friends, and messaging her roommates not to worry if she would come home late. After leaving the pub at around 11 p.m. no one ever saw her alive again. Now the scary part, in the following week she texted and called a friend and her parents stating that she's alright and will come back soon, although with an unusual sleepy voice. At her last call she accidentally said yes when her sister was asking if she's been held against her will and instantly correcting to a no. This was the last time someone heard of her. Her corpse was found in the woods close to where she disappeared 3 months later with no indication who her killer is. I live in a mountain town in southern Pennsylvania, in an area where most of the houses average about a half-mile apart. When I was younger I used to walk up the road to my friend's house and walk back home always before the sun set. The road was lined with woods until you got to my house. This one night in the summer I stayed way later than I normally did. I don't think I started walking home until around 11. There's a little bridge on the road that goes over a small stream. As I was walking across the bridge I was for sure I heard splashing like something was running in the water. Scared the shit out of me. It sounded big so I assumed it was either a bear, a mountain lion, or a hermit living in the woods. I was a stupid scared 12-year-old so of course I started running down the road to my house. About halfway down I saw something huge in the middle of the road and stopped. It was too dark to make out any features. It looked like it was animal. I could kind of make out 4 legs, but I had no idea what it could have been. It stunk though, kind of like rotten meat. I was probably 20 yards away but I could still smell it. I wasn't sure if it saw me or not, and was about to turn around and go back to my friend's house when the most disturbing sound came from it. The best way I can describe it is like a mix of a cicada screaming and a man coughing. That did it for me. I sprinted back to my friend's house as fast as I could, trying not to throw up from being so terrified. I told her parents what happened, they drove me home, and that was that. I never saw whatever it was again and nobody I told knew what it was that I saw. My best guess is it was a diseased animal of some sort. Was a security coordinator for a large electric company and had access to like 80 plus facilities CCTV infrastructures. Was doing maintenance check on some random train station at like 3 a.m., panned a camera as far to the right as possible to check that it was functioning, And this dude was on all fours eating a deer in the middle of the tracks. Watched him for like 10 minutes and went to get the other guy on shift. When I came back, the dude was gone. Rewound it, and the dude stopped munching on the carcass, wiped the gore off his face, and walked into the woods like he didn't have a care in the world. My parents' bedroom is at the front of the house, immediately at the front door. My mom goes out maybe once a year, and one night she came in at maybe 2 a.m. for her annual girls' night. She took her shoes off and headed upstairs to me and my siblings' bedrooms to say goodnight. My dad sleeps like a log, but for some unexplained reason, he was aware that the front door opened for a second time. It took him a few seconds to make it to the front door, and my mom was halfway up the stairs, but a random man was standing inside the house. Seeing my dad's shocked face, he said the house a couple doors down is being robbed. I was trying to tell someone, and then ran outside and down the street. The chances that this man happened to catch my mom on the rare occasion she went out, and basically the unheard of occasion she didn't lock the door behind her, and my dad manages to protect the family. I have screamed bloody murder and he hasn't stirred. I can't imagine what would have happened and this guy was any luckier. My mom maybe never would have made it up the driveway, or we all could have been in danger. When I was 13 I was on an ATV with my 2 older sisters, one 15 and the other 18. We were going to my grandma's, which was less than 2 kilometers away from my parents' place. We were traveling through our fields, but on the way I suggested we go around the fence so we didn't have to open the gates. It was pretty much the same path, just a bit off to the side. We had gates because this was our pasture for the cows. As we get to the middle of the field, we all notice something sitting on top the hill we were about to climb. On top this hill we had a somewhat big pile of rocks from working the fields a long time ago. We slowed to a crawl because it looked human. We thought maybe a calf fell and was stuck, or maybe it was my uncle who looked after the cattle. But this thing was sitting weird, basically like how Spider-Man perches over buildings, crouched out on top a rock. As we were sitting there trying to figure out what we were seeing, this thing slowly stood up and my heart sank. Its arms were long, grossly long. I screamed to stop and instantly jumped from the front of the ATV to the driver, replacing my sister. As we were switching, this thing started running at us, but it was running weird. Its arms were swaying back and forth like normal runner, but because of how long the arms were it looked weird. You would think it would run on the long arms, but it didn't. It was running fast. I turned around and shot off straight through the field. My sisters were screaming it was still coming, but I honestly could not look back at this thing. I just said don't look at it. We rounded the corner and that's the last we seen it. After that corner it's trails to my parents' house. As we got home I crashed the ATV into the deck trying to get in as fast as we could. We were so scared my parents actually believed us. They called all the family to warn if it was a trespasser. They said nobody seen anything or anyone in the fields. Now I want to describe this thing. It was tall, skinny, and wore no clothes. Just a body is what we could see, grayish color, and the head wasn't shaped like a human's, it was thin and small. We were about 30 to 40 meters from this thing. It was during the day too, happened in Alberta. My conclusion is that a bear broke its front legs jumping down from a tree. The legs healed but not fully, so it couldn't run on the front paws. And due to the front legs being broken it can't eat right, so it thinned out / lost fur. But this thing was tall, and skinny. I don't think it was a person just because of the arms. Also I live in the countryside on a farm. This all happened on private land that was fenced off. Many years ago someone told me a story about how they got a bit lost while traveling between states. Somehow or other they ended up on a seldom used county road out in the boondocks. This was before cell phones or GPS were common, so as evening got on they decided to ask for directions at the first house they came across. An old 2-story farmhouse type, but not abandoned looking or anything. They parked along the side of the road and began the long walk up to the front door. They said there was no driveway connecting the house to the road, just a gravel footpath. It sounds stereotypical, but about halfway there they started getting a funny feeling, like there was something wrong or off about this place. That's when they noticed someone staring out a window on the second story. Close enough to see it was a thin masculine figure, too far away to make out any facial details. Only, this man was upside down in the window. As if gravity had flipped and he was standing on the ceiling. Just standing there and staring. They stopped in their tracks, confused. After a minute the man moved back from the window, turned, and disappeared in kind of a herky-jerky fashion from waist to head, like they were descending, ascending. An inverted staircase. I told them it was probably just a couple of mirrors in the room creating the effect, but they said it freaked them out so bad they ran full speed back to the car and drove off. Even though there's a logical explanation, that story has always stuck with me. So, a few years back I hiked the Appalachian Trail. Toward the end I did a ton of solo night hiking, Because even in nature I have a fucked up sleep schedule, so I more or less hiked for 4 to 5 hours every night after dark. One night as I was walking near a lake, I saw a few lights off to my right, maybe 50 feet away. They seemed to be along the bank of the lake. This was odd for a few reasons. First, this was the middle of a pretty desolate stretch of woods, maybe 3 days hike to the nearest road crossing. Second, the lights were unlike any I'd seen before. I don't really have the words to describe how they were different, but here's what I got. They were extremely intense. Brighter by far than those generated by a headlamp. They gave off no light rays. This was particularly strange. It was like looking at heated crystals or something. Imagine a very bright light in total darkness, but one that doesn't illuminate anything around it. Anyways, I was pretty confused and decided to turn off my headlamp and walk through the foliage toward the lights. As soon as I got close, maybe 15 feet away, the lights shut off. The second that they went off, I heard an enormous crash and splash in the lake. And I mean fucking huge. It sounded like a cannonball hit the surface of the water. So at this point I was super sketched out, and basically jogged/ran the fuck out of there, and didn't stop until I hit a shelter a couple miles down the trail. So, a couple days pass, and I tell a bunch of other hikers the story, and we come up with some possible explanations, but nothing really comes of it. Then a week or so later, I'm staying at a shelter and tell the story, and this guy starts freaking out. He tells me that about a week ago he and his friends passed a makeshift cabin/barn next to a big lake, and the door had a chain link on it, which was weird because no one lives anywhere near this area. So, even though they couldn't get inside, they turned on their lights and took a peek inside. And all over, apparently written like 50 times, like some deranged person from a horror movie, took to the walls with chalk, it said, "Don't follow the lights." I later had his story confirmed and expanded upon by his friends who he was with. That's it, kids. Weird shit in nowhere, Maine. So I was walking to a friend's house, around 11 p.m. It's pitch black except for the occasional street light. I live in a pretty rural town, so things are kind of spread apart. I was halfway there when I walked by this insurance office. The alarms inside were going woo 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 woo, and there was a parked car running with a driver looking around anxiously, and these two big dudes dressed all in black were coming out the front door of this office, carrying something massive into the backseat. I made the rookie mistake of letting these guys see me, i.e. I stood there like a deer in headlights, watching the whole thing, instead of hiding, and one of them spotted me. "Hey!" One of them shouted. I just straight up booked it down the road, as fast as I could, and I didn't look back. I could hear the sound of footsteps behind me, the engine of this car being revved up. The only sound I could hear was my own heartbeat at this point. After about a solid 2-minute all-out sprint. Laugh at me all you want for only running 120 seconds, when you're running for your life, you give it everything you have. This sprint could have qualified me for the 100-meter dash. I finally glanced behind me and no one was there. I was completely winded and I felt like I was going to throw up. I stood there trying to catch my breath. I thought I probably shouldn't be standing here on the sidewalk, so I made the wise choice of getting off the main road and ducking behind some shrubs to catch my breath. Not 1 minute later, this car comes up real slow. All the windows down. They're only going about 5 miles per hour, 8 kilometers per hour for everyone else. It's the same car from earlier and they're looking for me. I lay down flat on my belly, completely engulfed by the shrubs and the muddy terrain. They finished driving by, but I still wait about 10 minutes before finally getting up and continuing my walk. The rest of the walk was pretty uneventful, but I called the police to let them know about what just happened when I got to my friend's house. He let me stay the night so I wouldn't have to walk back in the darkness. On the way back home the next morning, I walked by the same insurance office, shattered glass everywhere. 3 police cars parked out front. That classic yellow tape for a crime scene that you see in the movies, and some random woman sobbing her eyes out. This one's a bit long, so strap in, y'all. This is some genuine spooky shit. I was about 14. It was the last day of 8th grade and I hated middle school, so I decided to spend the day with my mom. We started out by going to the graveyard to look at the old tombstones, seeing as the oldest ones were from the 1800s. Really cool looking. Anyway, we get there and it's foggy as fuck. Keep in mind this is like June. Creepiest thing was seeing these massive cables from the radio towers appearing and disappearing in the fog. No beginning or end, they were just there. 2 giant black lines in the sky. It was surreal. We're at the base of a hill and the gravedigger is there, so my mom chats him up. I can't remember exactly when it started, but I heard this frequency in my head. It was electric, no source on where it came from. Felt like it was buzzing directly in my brain. I don't know how to explain what happened next. I felt compelled. My feet started moving of their own accord up the hill. I have never experienced a trance before, so I have nothing to compare it to, but suffice it to say I was not in control of my body. I couldn't hear what the grave digger or my mom was saying anymore, the electric tone was that loud in my head. I get up the hill and stop in this circle of tall tombstones, the ones that look kinda like crosses. I'm standing in front of the tallest one, this white tombstone that's just looming over me, and I turn away from it. Suddenly the frequency stops. It was like waking up abruptly from a dream. Or shit, even like your head piercing the surface of warm water, when you feel that rush of chilly air across your face. I'm in control of myself again. The realization of what just happened hits me and like. Have you ever felt calm panic before? The kind where your mind is simultaneously fucking terrified and also tranquil? It was the most paradoxical panic attack I've ever had. I realized that that was weird. I should be really freaked out right now. I turned and walked back down the hill to my mom. I didn't even read the tombstones. It's been over a decade now and I still can't explain what the fuck happened. I haven't experienced anything like that since. I've told this on here before, but when I was younger we had our experiences with what we lovingly named Dead Kid. The first time this happened, I was probably around 10 to 12. The night started with me playing a game on my brother's computer up until he fell asleep, which is when I moved to the living room to let him rest. I stayed up late doing a stupid Coca-Cola themed puzzle because I was determined to finish before I went to sleep. I heard my brother talking and got confused. I turned down the TV and heard him saying I hate but. Do you hear me? I hate but. I started to walk towards his room when I heard him say whatever. And he stopped talking. I shrugged and headed back to my fancy puzzle. The next morning he asked me what I was doing the night before. I explained my feat of finishing the puzzle and he said no. When you were hunched over at my computer. Were you asleep? I was trying to get your attention and you weren't responding. I told him that I was in the other room when I heard him shouting my name. He told me that someone was at his computer desk with the monitor on, staring down at the keyboard. He thought it was especially weird because there was nothing on the monitor, just a blank white screen. We thought it was creepy, but moved on with our lives. That summer, I was in a group with our church's youth group and we were doing a photo scavenger hunt. We needed to take photos of ourselves in different places and whoever gathered the photos first won a prize. One of the pictures we needed was to have the group standing together in a bathtub, with our clothes on, internet. We went to my house since it was closest and on the way in, my mom said hello to all the guys in my group. She was a teacher and knew all of them from school. Nothing strange. That night, my mom asked me who the last boy who went up the stairs was. I listed off the guys in our group. She confirmed she saw all of them, but the last one stuck out because he didn't say hi back to her and wouldn't look at her. I told her that there wasn't anyone else and that she knew everyone there. She kept insisting there was another kid who followed us and she got a weird feeling from him since he wouldn't acknowledge her. Nope. No additional kid. The next year I was home alone at night playing something on my PS2. I thought I heard someone so I went downstairs to see if anyone got home. No cars were in the driveway, so I just assumed it was one of our cats. I started going back upstairs and I heard my mom's voice from her room call my name. I froze and didn't go upstairs. She wasn't home. I turned on all the lights and waited for someone else to get home before going back up. Nothing else happened that night. After these events, my brother and I would get those weird feelings like someone is standing behind you and no one would be there. We'd hear the stairs creaking, but no one would be walking on them. Coming out of sleep, I think I saw a figure in my doorway from time to time. Oh, I have one. Small apartment, new wife, first kid. In order to get into the kitchen from the living room you had slalom past the couch, a computer desk, and into the doorway. For an adult, this is fine. For a child who was just learning to run in a computer desk that was at the perfect make sure your kid eats crayons and can only count to spaghetti height, it was a nightmare. I was tired, positioned on one end of the couch and trying to watch TV. I had just worked a million hours at the factory and just wanted some peace. Zoom. My daughter runs by me and I can't wait to wear a helmet speeds and I catch her before she bonks off the desk. I tell her to stop running to the kitchen and go back to dazing in front of the TV. Zoom. She tries it again, giggling, thinking it is now a game. I'm tired, I'm cranky, and now I'm trying to keep a kid from making sure her only college choice is burger, while my wife watches TV on the other end of the couch. I turn her around, yell at her more sternly, and repeat this game about 3 more times. Then, half asleep I watch in horror as a little blonde head zooms past me, and into the kitchen. I lose my shit. I jump up, yelling, and stomp into the kitchen just in time to see the cupboard under the sink close. "What in the hell are you doing?" I yell. What in the hell was that?" My wife asked behind me, wide-eyed and pale, my young daughter mostly asleep in her arms. We never, ever looked, and moved soon after. I don't believe in ghosts, but I swear I grew up in a haunted house. It was a 1950s Rambler, of all things. We know that the people that built the place had a mentally disabled son who died in the house in his 40s, but he was somewhere around 3rd grade mentally, basically a child. We also know that the house was on the market a long time before my parents bought it. I've been told, but haven't confirmed, that when it finally sold, the family that moved in lived there less than a year and then moved out and put the house on the market for a steal. My parents snapped it up, and lived there for close to 30 years. Growing up in the house, it was like the shadows were always moving. Some of them were aggressive, some of them were not, but one shadow showed up time and time again, a shadow of, what seemed to me at the time, a rather large man. He wasn't that tall, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, but he was thick. I'm a big comic book fan and he reminded me of a disheveled kingpin. That shadow was a troublemaker. He would stand outside of the bathroom door and lunge at you as you exited. If you were transporting a hot pan from the stove to the sink, or from the oven to the dining room, he would lunge at you like he was going to knock the pan out of your hands. In the yard, he would hide around a mimosa tree and lunge at you while you were mowing the yard. One time I was so startled I jumped off the riding mower and tripped. The mower had a butt sensor and stopped immediately, thank goodness. After that, I mowed that area with a push mower. He would spook me in the shower, and at night when I was trying to sleep, and if I was home alone watching television, the works. In this house, we had a game room that was a nicely converted garage. My sister was scared of that room, and wouldn't go in there at night without anyone with her. Strange stuff happened in that room. The lights would turn on for no reason. The television in there would turn on. There were 2 closets in there, both with double bifold doors. The doors would fling open and stuff would hurl out of the closet. The door to the game room was oriented so that you could see from the doorway into the sitting area of the living room, where we mostly watched TV. We usually kept this door completely shut, but sometimes we would hear jiggling on the doorknob, and the door would open just a sliver, like someone was watching us in the other room. One time my sister brought home her boyfriend from college, and he slept on the couch in the living room. He said in the middle of the night he heard the door to the game room open, stuff being moved around in the dark, and the light to the game room come on. He sat up in a panic, just in time to see a chair move and one of the closet doors open on its own, and a couple of piles of sewing fabric get thrown on the floor. My mother has been a lifelong fabric collector, she used to be a pretty good seamstress. The guy was scared half to death, refused to sleep in the house again, and broke up with my sister soon after. We all got an uneasy chuckle out of the whole thing. That was over 15 years ago, probably closer to 20 years now. My sisters and I are grown now with our own kids, and we all live a long way from that house. I barely think about the stuff I saw growing up there. A few years ago, though, my sister was visiting our parents, who only moved out of the house recently, with her son and 2 daughters, and her oldest daughter suddenly started. My sister asked her what was wrong, and she said, "Mommy, why does that man like to scare me?" "What man, honey?" "The man who likes to stand outside of the bathroom door." Was driving near Peggy's Cove one night around 2 a.m. with the oldest brother. It's pretty isolated there, very few houses or people in area. Drive by this young man hitchhiking. He's got a huge duffel bag, walking with a bit of a limp. We drive by him and immediately start saying we should turn around to get him because it's so late, he's probably pretty sore, who knows where he's even walking from? So turn around and drive back to get him. We pass no other cars. And there's absolutely no one on the road. We drive by where we saw him. No one there. We drive another 2 or 3 km past that. And no one there. We turn ourselves back around and drive by again, still looking for this guy. Absolutely nowhere to be found. I still get shivers when I think about that night. There's no reasonable explanation for where that guy could have disappeared to in such a short window of time in the middle of nowhere. I live in the deep mountains. I'm talking a 45 minutes drive to the nearest small town. We are nearly completely isolated, and surrounded on all sides by thousands of acres of national forest. It is the real deal to live there, and not uncommon for large predators to roam through our property, grizzlies, lions, wolves, etc. To help combat this, my wife and I have several large shepherd dogs that roam the property. They do an excellent job rerouting wildlife around the property, marking, and just being good survival companions. If something goes bump in the night, either the dogs freak out, or they don't. After a while, you learn interpret their barking and growling, from batshit panic when a bear is outside, To annoy it, I'm trying to sleep yapping when a raccoon gets in the trash. Still, you never get fully used to them barking in the night. There's always a what if in the back of your head. Well, I let them inside to eat at night or when it's too cold to be outside. One December evening my wife and I had them in and were watching Planet Earth. No big deal, we're all a big happy family gathered around the TV. My shepherds love to watch the television, see all the cool animals. We had watched several episodes and they never made a peep when they saw sharks, elephants, komodos, hyenas, blah, blah. Then came the mountain episode and they were on high alert but still calm. Until they cut to a night vision scene of a mountain lion stalking in the dark. They all lost it. Nearly knocked over TV trying to attack it. Our youngest pup, still 80 pounds, jumped on our laps and was visibly shaking and full tilt barking and growling. It was unnerving to say the least. We get lions around here, but to see how keen the dogs were on just a clip of one really demonstrated not only the fact that they were intimately familiar with the threat, but that they instinctively knew what one looked like prowling in the night. It was an inherent threat and they not only knew it, but were scared to death of it. We had watched hundreds of hours of shows with them and never once got that reaction before. Alright, thanks for sticking with me this far. Here's the shit your pants scary part of the story. I really don't even like writing it, because the whole thing still freaks us out to this day. We are again all inside on a cold winter night. My wife and I plop down to watch some TV, and the dogs gather around intently. I decide to throw on a stupid alien documentary my friend recommended. The dogs watch closely, but seem normal. Then the documentary shows some supposed pics of graylings lurking in the night. The dogs lose it. Worse than the mountain lions. Holy shit, we have to turn the TV off to stop the dogs from destroying the house, and even then they are all super freaked out, tuck tails, whimpering, the works. Again, we watch TV with them all the fucking time and nothing has ever got them riled up, let alone full panic, except for these two instances. After we calmed the dogs down, my wife and I sat in silence for a long while as the horror slowly washed over us. That what if when you hear the dogs freaking out in the middle of the night apparently could be aliens. Not cool. My sister is 4 years older than me. This is relevant later. About a year before I was born, my dad built a house in the country for our family. So I'm 4 years old and playing downstairs with mom and decided to go get a toy from my room upstairs. My bedroom was small. Only about 12 by 12. The door opened to the left, and my closet had French doors, which opened from the middle, outward. So when the bedroom door was open at the same time as my closet's left side door, it formed a little square space that was blocked off behind each at a 90-degree angle. As I walked into the room, I heard something rustle and exhale like an animal in the space behind the two doors. I turned and looked and the image was seared into my little kid brain. A green, scaly demonic-looking creature was crouched behind the door. It was small. Maybe only 4 feet tall, but had red eyes and yellow sharp teeth. The green scaly/bumpy skin was weird and hard to describe. The grayish-green shade was sickening. Like the color itself gave me a visceral reaction. Being so young, I didn't exactly understand what I felt, but the creature gave off a vibe that it didn't want to just hurt me. It wanted to tear me to shreds and destroy me. It didn't growl but kind of shifted its crouch and flashed its teeth when we made eye contact. I lost my shit and went screaming, sprinting out of my room and downstairs to my mom. Mom was a teacher, and one of the calmest, most logical people I've ever known. She went into mom/teacher mode and sat me down at the kitchen table with paper and crayons to draw what I'd seen. She told me something like, when we draw what we're afraid of we can see it's not scary. Mom got me calmed down enough to draw the creature while she worked in the kitchen. When I was done, I called for her to come look. When she saw the drawing, she immediately made some dismissive comment like, "See, that's not something real, it was only your imagination," but her tone and demeanor had changed. She grabbed the picture off the table and walked out of the room with it. I calmed down and we didn't speak about the green demon thing again. 14 or 15 years later, don't remember exactly, but I was either 18 or 19 and a freshman in college. I was home eating dinner with mom, my older sister, and girlfriend from school. We were talking about memories from the old house. We'd since moved away. I said, "Mom, do you remember when I thought I saw that green demon thing? It was like someone sucked the air out of the room." Mom got quiet and my sister said something like, "Wait, you saw it too?" Mom then told me it was the most frightened she'd ever seen me as a kid, and my sister had seen the same thing, in the same spot when she was 4 and I was a newborn. Mom had actually done the same let's draw what we're afraid of exercise with my sister and kept the 2 pictures that we drew. Mom found both drawings when she moved again about a year later. My sister and I were helping with the move and Mom showed them to both of us. They were clearly 4-year-old art quality, but share the same exact features, skin color, scales, red eyes, etc. I had some other weird experiences in that house, but this post is long enough. If you'd like to hear them, I can share more in a reply. I went to high school in Indiana and lived in a fairly new subdivision of homes, on a golf course, between some county roads. We lived deep in the subdivision and there was a planned extension for a new phase of homes to be built adjacent to us in a wooded area, and a gravel construction entrance to a county road that we often took as a shortcut for leaving the neighborhood. Summer 2005. I was 16 at the time, newly licensed, and left my house around 9 p.m. to go pick up a friend. I took the shortcut out of the neighborhood as usual, picked up friend, and within 15 minutes was headed back to my place with my friend in the car. We go to take the shortcut back into my neighborhood, wind down the gravel road for a minute and come around the bend to a giant cross on fire, surrounded by 20 to 30 KKK members. Keep in mind, I had just driven down this road 15 minutes prior. We freak out, slam the car into reverse, and head out the other direction to enter the neighborhood through the main entrance. With our curiosities piqued, we park the car at my parents' house and head out on foot along the gravel road, making sure to stay concealed in the trees, to get another look. We walked the entire length of the road and found no trace of a burned cross or KKK anywhere. All of these events took place within 45 minutes and that has never made any sense to me. This will get buried, but whatever. When I was in college I would go visit my boyfriend over the weekend, in another city, where he studied. It was a half-hour away, and sometimes his roommate's girlfriend would give me a ride back on Sundays, since my college was on her way home. Once we all had dinner pretty late and she decided to leave at Monday, 5 a.m., and offered me a ride. She always dropped me at the beginning of a long avenue, so that she would have to leave the main road, and I would walk for 20 minutes to get to my apartment. I took the ride because I never thought about how early it was and how dark that avenue got at night. Anyway, I get out and start walking fast, because I was a little freaked out by how empty and dark are all the streets. Now, the avenue is really broad, like 6 lanes, and while I'm walking I noticed in the corner of my eye, that there was someone walking the same speed as I am. When I looked at him, I saw that it was a guy, dressed in a full white suit with a hat, but he was walking very weirdly, with very short steps, almost as if his feet were tied together. The weirdest part was that even walking like this, he was moving super fast, at the exact same pace as me. His face has something off, I couldn't see properly because I was far, but I could swear that he had a big smile on his face. I've never ran so fast in my life. Alberta Hospital. But it's not a place you can explore though. A few years ago I did cleanup work there after a patient lit his room on fire in one of the wings in the main building. There's a small building off to the side of the main building that had been shut down and closed. It was a nice day out, so during my lunch break, I sat down on the steps of the rear entrance of the building to eat my sandwich. Then I heard a dull, kind of a muffled banging sound from inside the building. So, I walked up to the entrance door which had small narrow windows in them and I cupped my hands and brought my face up close to one of the small windows to peek inside. There was nothing there that I could see could have made that noise, but for some reason, even though it was daytime with the sun bright, it just seemed rather dim inside. Then all of a sudden this dreadful feeling came over me and felt a wave of chills going through my body like I never experienced before in my life. Naturally, I tried to pull my head back to step away from the door, but for inexplicable reason I just couldn't. It was as though my body froze for what seemed like an eternity, and I remember I just stopped breathing from the sheer terror I was overcome with. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't do that either. I was thinking how something was going to appear into my view any second, which quickly spiraled me into a deep panic, but I was able to snap my head back away from the window and took a deep, deep breath. I sat back down on the steps and tried to pretend nothing happened, but the hair on the back of my neck was still standing and felt like somebody was right behind me. So, I scurried to the hospital staff lunchroom where my coworkers were. When I sat down on the table to join my coworkers, I guess they sensed that I wasn't myself, and one of them asked me if everything was all right. I just said that I might be coming down with something. Then next morning, I spotted a couple of security guards in the staff lunchroom having coffee and asked if there's any interesting history about the building. They both looked at each other and one of them asked me why I'm curious. I simply told them that I heard some strange noise coming from inside the building yesterday when I was eating my lunch on the steps of the rear entrance, and they both looked at each other again. Then one of them told me since it's closed and nobody's supposed to be in there, they kind of pretend it doesn't exist. Then he went on to tell me that just up until a couple of years ago, at the main reception station of the main building, The old switchboard was still there before they ripped it out, and every once in a while, always at around 2 a.m., the office line light of the empty building would start blinking. He told me nobody dared to pick up the phone and nobody dared to do a sweep of the building to see who was calling the main reception. They'd just let the light blink until it died. When I was younger, about 13, all the grandkids were staying at Grandma's house for the night. I was in a bed with one of my cousins who was 8. In the bed next to us was her twin and our youngest cousin, who was 4. They all wanted the door open, so being the oldest I had to oblige. Her twin and the youngest fell asleep around 11, but we stayed up talking until about 2. She eventually stopped responding to me, so I thought she had fallen asleep. I just laid there on my back waiting to fall asleep. I looked towards the door and see long, skinny fingers wrapping around the doorframe. I told myself I was just very tired and rolled over. Of course, I looked back at the door. The fingers were still there, and this time there was a head peeking around at me. I was mortified and actually think I stopped breathing for several seconds. I had felt true, primal fear for the first time. It was near the top of the door opening, so it was 6 to 7 feet tall. I stared at it for what felt like forever, but it didn't move, and eventually I passed out from exhaustion or maybe fear. The next morning at breakfast, the cousin that had shared a bed with me was not talking or eating, just dragging her fork around her plate. I asked her what was wrong. She said she couldn't sleep last night after I fell asleep because something had been staring at her from around the door. She said its head looked funny and it had long fingers. I almost passed out when she confirmed my sighting. However, since she was only 8, I just told her that she probably had a nightmare because she fell asleep before I did. I think about this incident a lot. I didn't say anything or let on that something was wrong, yet she saw exactly what I had seen. This cousin ended up passing away at 14, and I never spoke to her about it after that day, although I wish I had sometimes. Every now and then I'll experience sleep paralysis and notice some sort of strange noise echoing through the room or a figure in my peripheral. As time went on, I found it easier to snap out of that state given how frequent I was experiencing it. One night was different. I had woken up, still in sleep paralysis, but more in control of my body's movements and conscious enough to see and hear what's surrounding me, and as that's occurring, I hear my mom walk into my room and drop off a box of my belongings. The box sounded like it was filled with plastic utensils, so still semi-conscious, I was curious to know what it was, though I couldn't see it and strangely enough, couldn't see her. I figured it was my mom as I heard the sound of her flip-flops flapping around, and she normally checks up on me late at night, so it wasn't something I was alarmed about. She walks away, closes the door behind her, and I immediately snap out of it. I look around, no box. Turned on my bedroom light and saw nothing out of the ordinary in my room, so I step outside and all the lights in my house were still off. Walked around to see if she'd still be awake, but after checking everyone's room, they were all asleep. I mean, she'd have super speed if she made it to her room that quick before I came out. The next morning, I asked her if she came into my room last night, but she declined. Strange, so then I asked my sister, less likely to come into my room, but I asked anyway. She didn't. Asked my dad and I got the same answer. Till this day I'm not exactly sure of what I experienced that night. We were 10 or 11 years old. 4 boys wandering the neighborhood in 1980-something. In the group was the toughest kid around, the kind who you were pretty sure took some beatings at home and who always got into fights. We were friends just out of being hopeful he never turned on us. We passed the Revolutionary War cemetery in our town, and there was an old abandoned house in disrepair next to it. It was getting dark and he dared us to go inside. We all chickened out, but he went in himself by breaking some boards off the back door. We stood out on the street and waited. After a few minutes we all swear that we saw an orange glowing light from an upstairs window. I kind of thought he was starting a fire and got super freaked out, but then the light immediately disappeared and reappeared instantly in a downstairs window. Then we heard this kid let out a yelp/scream like nothing I've ever heard before. We heard stuff getting knocked over and he came bursting out the back door, absolutely white in the face with tears pouring from his eyes. He kind of jogged right past us and we followed him. He started to sprint and ran back to his house without saying a word. To this day, the toughest kid I ever knew will not talk about what happened or what he saw that evening, and that is the freakiest thing about the entire ordeal. When I was a child around the age of 7 or 8, I was spending the night at my grandma's house. She had a golden retriever named Kicker. Kicker slept on the floor at the end of the bed. So me and my grandma have another lovely day of goofing around and we head to bed that night. Kicker goes to his usual spot. My grandma spends a couple hours telling me family stories, then we fall asleep. Something woke me up in the middle of the night, I don't know what it was. I sat up in bed, and the moonlight filtering through the curtains was just enough to let me see the room. At the foot of the bed was Kicker's face, staring at me sleeping. Something about that terrified me, and I literally passed out in bed. The next morning, I tried making sense of what happened. Why did seeing Kicker scare me so much? But the more I thought about the event, the more it seemed like it wasn't Kicker, and my brain was just trying to make sense of what happened, so Kicker's face got popped into the story. I remember glowing eyes. I was aware even at that age that dogs' eyes can glow from the tapetum lucidum, as I loved studying animals. I am now a dog groomer, and I know what a dog's eyes look like when they glow. This wasn't it. It was different. Like the light was coming from the eyes, not a reflection of outside light. The face looked different and strange too, but I couldn't pin down what it looked like because Kicker's face kept popping into view whenever I focused on it. I have no other way to describe this experience. It was just so weird and scary.